name is Jennifer. I've been married to my husband, James, for 3 years. I finally reached my breaking point. That being said, it's not that I have issues with my husband. The one I have issues with is my mother-in-law, who we've been living with since we got married. So, I was thinking of letting out my frustrations about my mile in front of all the relatives. I really was. But the family gathering today is to meet the fiancé of James's younger brother. Basically, it's a big gathering with the extended family. There's a chance that because of my actions, my brother-in-law's marriage might be called off. If that happens, I'd like to think that his fiancé dodged a bullet. I feel bad for my brother-in-law, but as I was thinking these things, I showed up at the family gathering. The gathering had a friendly and pleasant atmosphere throughout. As it was about to wrap up, I garnered everyone's attention.
Excuse me, but could you all give me a moment?
When I said that, everyone suddenly went silent. They stared at me with what's going on, expressions. I took a deep breath.
I know this might not be the right timings, but we haven't been able to have kids in the 3 years since we've been married. First was...
Wait, what do you mean?
Said my husband, looking confused.
I looked at him apologetically and said we haven't had kids in 3 years. So as my Miles says, I'll file for divorce. So you lose time.
What?
My husband shouted and stood up.
Is James's father also looking shocked? Ask me, Jennifer, what are you talking about all of a sudden? Shut.
Yes, my Miles, we couldn't have kids in 3 years. It's tradition to get divorced here. I agree.
Oh, but that's a sick comment.
My father-in-law looked at my Mile in shock.
At that, my Monsieur, looking flustered, said, "What are you talking about? Jennifer?"
My Mai started to scramble for words. As I watched her, I remembered all the times she had been unkind to me. My husband works in farming. Perhaps because of that, he had trouble finding someone to marry. His parents had almost given up on him ever getting married. But my husband himself hadn't given up. After much effort, I met him on a dating app. I was just an ordinary office worker, and I grew up in a suburban area of a city, something similar to New York. That's why I had a slight interest in living in the countryside and farming. Of course, I understood that farming as a profession would be pretty challenging, but compared to the hectic life of the city, farming seemed several times more appealing to me. So, I quickly decided to date my now husband. After about a year of dating, I moved to the countryside where he lived. I moved into my in-laws' house. The farm work was done by the family, and I was told it's more convenient that way. Thinking, well, alright, I started living with my in-laws without much thought. I assumed I'd have some help from them on a day-to-day basis, so I wasn't too worried. But after moving, I came to realize some things I hadn't before. And that was the reality of farming. Everyday life was as I had expected, with no issues. However, the actual work of farming was way different than I had imagined. Not only is the income dependent on the weather, but there's also the need to worry about pest control. Even though there's been advancements in machinery and digitalization, there are still parts of farming that rely on a farmer's intuition. In that sense, for a newbie like me, it was all quite challenging. There was a lot to learn, and it required physical strength in the early days of our marriage. Yet, I never came to hate farming because everyone around me was so kind, especially my father-in-law. Even though he was busy, he took the time to teach me the basics of farming. My husband gave me detailed instructions so that I'd understand. Even when I learned just a little, they would praise me, maybe even a bit excessively. That's why, even though I was a clumsy newbie, I managed to keep up with the farming. For my husband, I was his precious wife. To my father-in-law, I was the bride of his only heir. Basically, both of them did whatever they could to make sure I was happy and didn't leave. Sure, farming was tough, but thanks to their care and concern, I had no complaints about my married life. In fact, I even felt lucky to be living with them. However, there was one person who felt the opposite, and that was my Mile. It seems she didn't like me getting all the attention. Whenever she could, my Mile would scold me harshly. "Jennifer, are you ready for tomorrow?" Yes. I'll start now. Thanks, Patron. How's that going to work? I'm sorry. You think farming is a walk in the park? No, I don't. No excuses. Get to it right away. I was always nagged over such small matters, even about household chores. I was picked on for the tiniest things, like using a toothpick to clean the corners of a Tupperware container, finish the laundry before starting the farm work, or during the summer, make the meals saltier, stuff like that. Of course, there were some things my Miles said that made sense. When you're working under the hot sun, you need more salt, so making the food saltier is a common approach. So, I would often listen and agree. However, there was one thing I couldn't agree with. It was about having children. Every now and then, my Mel would ask me, "Hey Jennifer, no kids yet?" Ugh, no. Don't you think you should hurry up and have some? Why? It's a no-brainer. For farmers, having an heirs crucial, she kept putting pressure on me like that. Eventually, I started to wonder if the stress from my mile was the reason I wasn't getting pregnant. After my husband and the others went out for farm work, I mumbled to myself. That's when it happened.
Suddenly, from behind me, I heard, did I do something?
Mama, what nature it would be? We're back! I lost the potatoes as it's upon the spirit. Strawberry?
I just came back to pick up something I forgot. So, you have a problem?
I regretted letting my guard down. At the same time, I knew a disgruntled meal wouldn't miss this golden opportunity.
With a smug smile, she said, "It's been about 6 months since you got married, and still no baby, right?"
Me, a birth nurse is Maya. That's 3 questions.
In our family, if you don't have a child within 3 years, it's customary to get a divorce.
It's divorce. Chucky, but we raised...
I was taken aback, but my mile continued calmly.
I had my son, James, in the 2nd year of my marriage. It's the same for all our relatives.
That's but you didn't mention this during the wedding.
Why would we? If we did, you might have refused to marry into the family. Well, if you don't want a divorce, just have a child.
Ow! My mother-in-law laughed loudly as if mocking me. She's been telling me to have a child for the longest time. That alone was stressful enough. And yet, if I don't have a child in 3 years, it's divorce. Such words add even more pressure. A whirlwind thoughts went through my mind, leaving me speechless in front of my mile.
Then, seeing my vulnerability, my mile annoyingly kept asking, "So no baby yet?"
Just hearing that once was stressful, which the ultimate silence. I feel that stress all the time, but from morning till night.
Every time she saw me, my mile would ask me, "How are you feeling? Jennifer,
I'm done.
Not just fine. Are there any signs of pregnancy? That's what I'm asking about."
Not yet. This is very auction.
Such a useless daughter-in-law.
She muttered under her breath. Her words stung. At that moment, my father-in-law came home.
Don't end the game, John studies. You ain't going out. I can help free. Are you okay? Tell out to Dudley.
No, that's fine. Feast free. And it was...
If you're tired, you can rest. Let Susan handle the housework. Rest.
Susan is my mamile. In essence, my father-in-law was showing concern for me. Being exposed to his kindness made me think, would someone really get a divorce just because they couldn't have kids these days? Both my father-in-law and husband are trying their best to keep me. I don't even think there's a need to go that far. Yet, would someone really decide to divorce just because they couldn't have kids in 3 years? My mail mentioned it as a tradition, but is there really such a tradition? I started to doubt what my mail said.
I should verify this. Should Fletcher start a white way?
And when I thought about it, I asked my father-in-law about our family tree while my Maya wasn't around.
I'd like to know for when I'm sending holiday gifts and such. Especially...
When I said this, my father-in-law shared the family stories without any suspicion. This family is like this. That one's like that, he went on. Eventually, he mentioned something interesting.
And you know, my brother took a long time to have kids. I think they had their first child after 10 years of marriage.
He reminisced, but that clarified it. Despite not having kids for 10 years, my father-in-law's brother and his wife didn't divorce. That means my mail story was a lie. Realizing that, I decided to get back at my mile.
As someone tries to pull one over on's back, on me. I get even. I gagged about it. Even if they cry and apologize, I'll never forgive them.
That from that day on, I decided to document every word and action of my meal. I took notes on all her actions and recorded everything she said to me. At the Kipiarizendo, I used a smartwatch with a built-in voice recorder, so she wouldn't know I was recording. This way, I can always have it on me. Besides, she probably doesn't even know what this is. And that's how I managed to record her voice without her knowledge. As time went on, my mile said to me, "It's almost been 3 years. If you don't have a child in 3 years, you better get a divorce."
Yes, like I'm serious. I mean, yeah. And I was recording. I spawned as Miqui.
During this time, as I was documenting my mail's tyranny, an opportunity came my way. It was regarding the engagement of my brother-in-law, Michael. Michael had met a woman named Carol, through a college friend. They had a long-distance relationship and seemed to be planning to get married soon. With Michael's fiancée coming to meet the family, we organized a family gathering with the relatives. The day happened to be almost 3 years since my wedding on a Sunday. I did feel bad for Michael and his fiancée, but it's probably better than having her go through the same ordeal. With that in mind, I exposed my Mil's actions and words in front of all the relatives. I said, my Mel told me it's customary here to get a divorce if a couple doesn't have a child within 3 years. Hearing this, my Mile was flustered.
Facing an angry father-in-law, she started stammering. That's not... I didn't mean...
On the other hand, when I looked at Michael and his fiancée, they seemed quite shaken. Michael, trying to comfort his worried-looking fiancée.
That's not a real tradition.
Really?
I wouldn't divorce you even if we don't have kids.
Michael tried to reassure her in various ways. Actually, as my Mile was being grilled by my father-in-law, she directed her anger at me.
It's all because you said something weird.
Yes, which madame? Tell me that. You told me that in Snappy? Like...
You have no proof. It's all accusations.
My Mile yelled at me. Her face was bright red with anger, pretending to be taken aback. I said, but it's true. Here's... Are you back? I then handed over my smartwatch to my father-in-law.
What's this? What does he really want to win?
My Phil tilted his head. It's a smartwatch. To put it simply, I began explaining the features of the smartwatch. I also mentioned its voice recording capabilities. My Mil tried to snatch it away. However, my Phil stopped her and said, would you mind playing that recording for me? As my Mile turned pale, I played the recording. If you don't have a child in 3 years, I'll make sure you get divorced. The recording of my Mil's laughter filled the room. The next moment, my Phil's voice boomed. What the heck is this? Well, did you really say this? The excuse seemed good enough. In the end, my Mil broke down in tears after being scolded by my Phile. My husband also started blaming her. How could you do something so terrible to my precious wife? I trusted you. Mom, we're not living together anymore, my husband began to say. After that, my husband and my Phil discussed things, and we decided not to live together with my in-laws anymore. Moreover, my Phil promised that my Mile would not come near us. However, my husband and my Phil's farmlands are next to each other, like properties in Nebraska. So whenever I'd go to the farm, I'd inevitably run into my Mil. That's when my Phil said, I'll have Susan only do house chores. I consider it her punishment. Is your Kay sure about this? When I asked, my Phil looked down and said, honestly, I would have divorced her right then and there. But just this once. Could you let it slide for me? Why would you go that far? Actually, my Phil explained about my Mil's family. Apparently, her family runs a farm in a nearby town, and she grew up in a strict family. He said if they found out she was being a bully to her daughter-in-law, she'd face severe consequences from her own family. They'd been married for so long, it'd be heart-wrenching. That's why he asked if I could just forgive her this time on the condition that I'll never have to see my Mile again. I wasn't inclined to forgive. However, with my husband and my Fuzzbee gang, I find her hard to say no outright. In the end, I reluctantly agreed to my Phil's proposal. My Mile got down on her knees crying. Thank you. I promise I'll never give you a hard time again. To even say such a thing. Of course, I couldn't believe those words. Knowing this person, she'll surely do something again. That's what I thought. Fast forward a month. I wasn't feeling well and visited the town doctor. The results? Pregnancy. My husband and I were overjoyed. It felt like getting pregnant right after the stress from my mother-in-law was gone proved that it was all her fault all along. But I couldn't say that to my elated husband. He might have had a hunch, but I figured it's best not to mention. I kept that thought to myself. Before heading home, we stopped by my father-in-law's. When we told my father-in-law about the pregnancy, he was beyond thrilled. He seemed even happier than my husband. I'll bring a gift over soon, so we'll see you soon, Dad. We had a lovely time together. That night, for some reason my brother-in-law and his wife dropped by. What brings you here? When I asked, my brother-in-law hesitated and said, actually, Phil is pregnant too. Marie, congratulations. Aw, thanks. So you're expecting too, right? Well, we haven't announced it yet. I was puzzled. Then he revealed how he knew. Apparently, when his wife came over for the family gathering, she already had signs of pregnancy. But because of the commotion I caused, she felt too shy to share. It seems she couldn't bring herself to admit the signs of pregnancy. What's more, she was scared of my mother-in-law and didn't even want to visit her family home. She did tell my father-in-law, but asked him to keep it quiet. So if Dad brings up the pregnancy, can you say it's about you, not us? That's fine, but keeping it a secret forever. I know. We'll tell the family once things settle. The pressure I felt from my mother-in-law was intense. That can't be good for someone pregnant. While my mother-in-law might avoid me, it's different with his wife. I'm worried about her well-being. Alright, leave it to me. Thank you so much. The couple expressed their deep gratitude and left. My husband, who had been silent, asked, "Is it really okay? Jennifer's Jennifer?" Of course. They're my precious brother and sister. Thank you. Everything was settled. That was what I thought. But rumors have a way of spreading. Before long, both my sister-in-laws and my pregnancies became known to the entire family. In the end, my brother-in-law seemed to have given up and formally announced the pregnancy to the relatives. My father-in-law suddenly exclaimed, "Now we can have a grand celebration." Of course, neither my sister-in-law nor I could overexert ourselves. But I didn't want to waste my father-in-law's kindness either. Let's just take it easy then. After discussing it with my sister-in-law, we decided to attend the family gathering. Since we had already mentioned we couldn't exert ourselves, the gathering was a subdued affair. We enjoyed the feast provided and engaged in quiet conversation. After that, we received gifts from the relatives and called it a night.
Here's my gift. Which person?
As he said this, my mother-in-law gently presented 2 wrapped gifts. One was wrapped in floral paper, the other in a plain color. I wondered, why 2 different wrappings? I assumed he would give us the same gift. As I was pondering this, my father-in-law handed over the plainly wrapped gift first.
This one's for Carol.
He handed it to my sister-in-law.
In that moment, my mother-in-law hurriedly said, "No, that one's for Jennifer."
Oh, risk this, Bruce. It doesn't matter. I do you because scared of that. Then I say to buy the same thing for both.
Clearly, my father-in-law intended to give the same gift to both. But judging by my mother-in-law's reaction, she must have intended to give me something bizarre. And so that's why the plain wrapping? I had an idea of what was inside, but watching this unfold was too entertaining. I watched with a grin on my face. My mother-in-law was fervently protesting to my father-in-law, but he didn't care.
What are you going about?
While my father-in-law was scolding my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law returned to my side. I whispered to her, "Maybe you shouldn't open that." "Why not? It might be something awful." When I said that, my brother-in-law noticed and asked, "What do you mean by that?" "Ah, nothing." I tried to cover it up, but it was too late. My brother-in-law began unwrapping the gift his wife received. Out came a small bouquet of white lilies. And just as I thought, I mumbled to myself, "Lilies are commonly given as sympathy gifts at funerals. Therefore, it's one of the things to avoid during celebrations." Yet, my Mile chose to buy it. This clearly meant she wanted to spite me on purpose. However, she accidentally gave it to my sister-in-law. "Mom, what's this?" My brother-in-law shouted in anger. My Mile began to panic.
Additionally, my Phil turned to my middle and said, "Why lilies? You shouldn't give this as a celebratory gift."
What on, Pets?
She tried to come up with an excuse. Just watching her. I chimed in. "It was meant for me, wasn't it?" Still trying to pick on me even after all that's happened, my words reminded everyone present of the recent incidents. They all started blaming my Mile at once. My sister-in-law and I decided to step into another room. After a while, my husband came to get us. "Mom and Dad have decided to divorce. It's a waste of time to stay here. Let's go home." Later on, my husband and I, along with my brother-in-law and his wife, left for our homes. After many scoldings, my Phil presented my Mile with divorce papers. She clung to him in tears.
I can't go back to my parents' house. It would be terrible.
You'll not disappoint you, sir. I can't.
After being sternly reprimanded by my Phil, my Mile was sent back to her parents' home. There, she was scolded severely by her own mother and was also asked to pay a compensation fee for the divorce. However, my Mile couldn't afford it, so her parents stepped in. Now, under her parents' watchful eyes, my Mile has been diligently working on their farm. Next, on the other hand, I had a smooth delivery and gave birth to a baby boy. My sister-in-law also had a lovely baby girl, and now we're both busy with parenting. By the way, possibly emboldened by recent events, she's already expecting her second child. She's determined to have a baby boy next. I'm fully occupied taking care of my son. though yet. I do hope to have another child within 3 years. Of course, even if we don't have another child within those 3 years, I have no plans of divorcing my husband.